Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here. Welcome to episode 325 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. We are joined on the show today by Cole Tanner from Ozonics Hunting to talk about the ozone devices they manufacture and sell to hunters as a way to minimize the chances of game smelling them afield. I know, it sounds too good to be true, but believe me, I have used an Ozonics unit for a long time myself now, and I have seen firsthand how beneficial they can be afield. In fact, I am certain that Ozonics machine helped me take a couple of animals under conditions where there's no way I would have been successful without using that unit. Well, Cole is going to tell us all about how and why these Ozonics units work, the situations they are best suited for, how to get the most out of them afield, and a little bit about their current product line. So without further ado, let's dive straight into things and start talking to Cole about Ozonics Hunting. Good morning, Cole. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Like we talked about before we started recording, I've been using Ozonics products for a long time, but this is the first opportunity I've had to talk to someone from the company about this in detail. So to get started, can you tell the audience a little bit about Ozonics Hunting, how the company first got started, and then we can take it from there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, Ozonics started back in 2007. It's actually owned by a guy named Scott Elrod. He's from Lake Jackson, Texas, which is just south of Houston there. Yeah, it's kind of a crazy story how it all started. Scott is actually a dentist by trade. In his dental practice, he had a company come in and they installed this ozone system that would be used when he does all these just really, really crazy surgeries and types of stuff. And they were using the ozone to help eliminate the odor when they cauterize skin, right? Because like burning flesh, right, doesn't smell good. Mm-hmm. And so it would use ozone to help eliminate that odor. And when they got the system all implemented, one day the light bulb just kind of went on, and he's like, man, I wonder if I could use this for hunting. You know, like this has got to work in the same way. Scott's he's the type of guy that once he gets going on something, there's kind of no stopping him. And so the first Ozonics unit was just this hodgepodged metal box with a coil on the inside hooked up to a truck battery. And they took it out in a ground blind in Texas. Like, you know, a lot of guys use feeders and put corn out for pigs and stuff like that. And they actually poured a bunch of corn all around the blind and had this makeshift ozone machine running on the inside and had pigs all around them. And if you've ever hunted pigs before, if they catch a whiff, you know, they just won't stand for it. You know what I mean? They're gonna head for Dodge, you know. And so they had these pigs all around them, had them on the downwind side in ways that they'd never seen before. And that's really where it all kind of started. And now, geez, how many years later, almost 20 years later, we are where we are. But it really all started, again, at his dental practice, seeing it work, and then, you know, taking it out and trying not to electrocute themselves. But really saw it work, and then it's really gone from there.
Okay, that is very interesting. I had no idea what the backstory was for the company. So yeah, you mentioned ozone. I know it's a key part of these devices. It's in the name of the company. Most people that are listening to this have probably heard of ozone in the context of the hole in the ozone layer around the planet Earth, all that stuff. I know that's not exactly what you're talking about. Can you go into a little bit more detail of ozone in the context of what you're talking about for scent elimination?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, like what you're describing about ozone in the atmosphere, there's really two ways that ozone is created. It's created via like UV light, and that's how we have ozone in the atmosphere. Okay, so like so many nanometers of UV light fractures oxygen O2, and it creates O3, aka the ozone layer. Okay. The other way that ozone is created is via what they call the corona discharge method, which is it's actually like a lightning strike. If you've ever just been driving down the highway and you see a lightning bolt, you see kind of in that instant, you'll see a purple glow on a lightning bolt. Or if you've ever remember when you were in science class and they had those little globes that you could stick your finger on, and all the current would like zing right to your finger, and you would see that purple hue along that, that current of electricity. That's actually electricity fracturing O2, oxygen, and recombining to create O3. And so that's really how we produce ozone in the ozonics unit, is via the corona discharge method. We're pushing air over this coil that we are pushing electric current through, and the coil itself, the coils are just the right distance apart that will arc between the coils, and it fractures the oxygen and recombines to create O3. And then obviously the fan pushes that, the push of the fan pushes that air over the coil and produce that ozone and exhaust it out the front of the unit. So that's really how we're producing it.
And what does ozone have to do with scent, and how does it neutralize it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry about that. I forgot that part. So here's the best way to describe it. Ozone is a very, very unstable molecule. It doesn't want to be ozone. It wants to revert back to oxygen. It's very unstable. We are trying to manipulate the instability of ozone. So we're trying to create a situation where that ozone will come in contact with your odor as quickly as it can, because once it comes in contact with it, it's going to stabilize. That's what it wants to do. So there's really kind of two ways of describing it. I'm trying to kind of go through the scientific way, and then I'll kind of explain the redneck way. But the scientific way, like we're saying, is it, once it comes in contact with your odor, it stabilizes. When it stabilizes, it oxidizes. When it oxidizes, it's changing the molecular structure of your odor. Okay, so I said a lot of big words there, right? Oxidation, stabilization, bop-a-da-bop-a-da-bop. The redneck way of describing it is, imagine your odor is a password, and the password is the word human, Human. When you go hunting, do you know the password? Okay, when they smell human, the olfactory sensors on their nose tell their brain a message, right? Danger. So when ozone comes in contact with your odor, again, it's very unstable. What it's doing is it's changing the password. It takes off the H and it takes off the N. Now it's not the word human anymore. It's the word UMA. When they smell UMA, that doesn't mean human. Again, from their perspective, it's not connecting the dots, right? That ozone is changing the password of your odor. It's changing the molecular structure so that animal doesn't perceive it as a threat.
That is very interesting. So I'd never heard it described that way before. Can you maybe I went a little bit too fast into this. Can you back up a tiny bit and maybe explain a little bit more about how things normally are? No ozone generator. I'm out there hunting. My scent is blowing in a direction. How is there a redneck way to explain how my scent works and gets to these animals and that sort of thing, and how they can recognize it and be alerted to it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's actually been some really cool studies out recently. University of Georgia. There's a couple different other universities that do a lot of different. There's actually, you can get a degree in whitetails now, right? There's a lot of different studies that are being done out there. And the reality is that we as humans, as hunters, we're producing odor. We're emitting odor. You follow me? Again, I'm gonna totally botch what they were calling it, but one of these universities did a study where they figured out like how much, let's just say like molecules or how much material or things that we were releasing and where we were releasing it from, right? Was it from our skin? Was it the dander that's coming off of our skin? Was it odor from our armpits? Was it our breath? You know what I mean? All these different places where we're producing odor. We're producing something that isn't in the environment before we got there. You follow me? What it really boils down to, and again, what they figured out is that we're producing, like thousands and millions of these odor molecules that are, and honestly, one of the things that in the study that showed is that one of the main places we're producing this odor is from our mouth. A lot of people don't realize when you go deer hunting, if you've ever spent any time looking at a thermal camera and you're just out on a really cold day, you see your breath. Think about that. We are literally a human exhaust pipe, right? When we're out there, we're just emitting odor constantly. And so the reality is that if you were out deer hunting and you have a deer on the upwind side, he's not going to smell you, right? Mm-hmm. The reality is that when you have a deer on the upwind side, we aren't affecting that deer's behavior. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. They obviously have their senses of smell and hearing and sight and all this stuff, taste, that they're using to, and their instincts to survive. When the deer's on the upwind side, they don't know you're there. We don't affect their behavior. But if you get on the downwind side of a deer, we've all experienced it. When you get on the downwind side, if a deer's on your downwind side, all of a sudden we are affecting that deer's behavior. You follow me? They stop, They stomp, they look up, they do the head bob dance, and generally they end up, they put their tail up and they bound off, blowing the entire way, alerting everything in the woods that were there. And again, that is because we are affecting that deer's behavior because of our odor. A lot of times, I say this all the time, a deer's eyes may fool them, their ears may play tricks on them, but their nose doesn't lie. If they don't like it, maybe they heard something, but they can't pick you out. What are they going to do? They're going to circle on the downwind side because they know they can trust their nose because their nose doesn't lie. And when they smell you, they're gone. That's the reality. And that's, I think, what we've all experienced when we go deer hunting, right? If we get a deer on the downwind side, they wind us.
There's like a stream of molecules that are coming off of us. Some of them are coming from our clothes, from, like you said, from our body odor, from our breath, our rifle, whatever. Different types of molecules for different scents. They're blowing with the wind in whatever direction that is going and creating, I don't know, maybe a trail or something like that through the air, and an animal walks through it. They will then smell these smells and have an idea of what is going on. Is that a general description of that's correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Nope. Yep.
And so the idea with an ozone generator is you are injecting ozone into this stream. It bonds to these molecules, and it doesn't necessarily eliminate or neutralize them, but it changes them. Is that correct?
Yeah. So that's a big thing that we always get a lot is they're like, okay, so am I masking it? Am I covering it up? And to your point, what we're trying to do is we are trying to exhaust that ozone in your downwind side, because it's the downwind side. It's that air that's getting to the deer. It's not really, it's not you, it's the odor coming off of you. You follow me?
Yes.
So we're trying to have that ozone exhausting the downwind side so that ozone can come in contact with your odor. And again, we're changing the molecular structure. We're not covering it up. We're not masking it. We're changing it, right? It's not your odor anymore. Or it's from a molecular perspective, it's not something that deer recognizes as a threat.
So they're still smelling something, but it doesn't scream human hunter to them.
Yeah, I mean, the other way that I describe it is, imagine if you have you're listening to this, we're having this conversation. Take your two hands and put your hands up in front of you and pull up all your fingers. You got 10 fingers, okay? Mm-hmm. When ozone comes in contact with it, I put down 7 of the 10 fingers. Well, now I only have 3 fingers holding up. Well, if I went to my kids and I said, if I had all 10 fingers up, I said, how many fingers am I holding up? They're going to say 10. If I put 7 of them down, I have 3. How many fingers am I holding up? They're going to say 3. I still have the fingers on my hand, but I'm not holding them up. It's the way that they perceive that. That's the other thing that I always describe is, I think what I've experienced is that, again, the other question I get all the time is, well, is it 100%? Like, are you going to get away with it every time? So they just never know you're there? No, man, it's not 100%. Nothing is. If it was 100%, we probably wouldn't be able to sell the thing, right? Like state agencies would outlaw them, right? If it was just 100%. But what I always say is that, again, is it going to help me 8 out of 10 times? Am I going to get away with it 8 out of 10 times? Do I experience encounters with deer where I think they think I'm at 200 yards when I'm at 20 yards, right? They get on my downwind side and they just can't figure it out. Does that make sense? They're not doing what they normally do without an ozonics, which is stomp, blow, and run away. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. They give me the time to potentially get that shot.
Okay, very good. Well, that was a really good description of how this works, and hopefully the listeners understand what we're talking about and the general principles behind this. So can you give an example either from yourself or a story from someone you know about how one of these ozone units helped you achieve success on a hunt?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of funny because I actually, I used to be a hunting guide in Southern Colorado. Long time ago. That's what I did for a living. I guided elk, mule deer, black bear, all sorts of stuff in Southern Colorado. And I was also a videographer. So I was, filming for a couple different TV shows and was doing that while I was also guiding. And it was awesome. And we would have all these different, there would be industry people, from different manufacturers that would come on hunts here and there. Well, again, I wasn't using an Ozonics at the time. I grew up in Iowa, hunted whitetails my whole life. And then, like I said, was out in Colorado, guiding, and the owner of Ozonics came on an elk hunt. And, just kind of by pure chance, I ended up being the guy that was going to get to guide him. And so, when guys would get there on hunts, we would always sit down with them and you kind of go through the rules and expectations and kind of what we're looking to try to do. And he was on an archery elk hunt, and elk hunting, especially with your bow, it becomes a real big cat and mouse game. When you're trying to call them in, you're trying to call and then trying to move. So they try to circle on the downwind side where you can get a broadside shot. Honestly, it doesn't work out more than it does, right? It's funny. It kind of feels like a losing proposition. It's really, really tough. And, I was explaining all this to Scott, and I always joked with clients when they would come on these hunts. I said, listen, I only really have two rules as a guide, right? Rule number one is, don't guide the guide. You came on a guided hunt, so, try to kind of let me do my job. I feel like sometimes guys came on those guided hunts and then they just wanted to try to kind of tell me what to do the whole time. It's like, if you didn't want to be guided, why didn't you pay for it? You know what I mean?
Right.
And then the other thing I would always tell people is don't walk like an elephant. Just try to like not step on every stick behind me. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes it's good to break sticks, but a lot of times it's good to be quiet. And so anyway, so he brought these Ozonics, and he was adamant that he wanted to, I'm explaining how we're going to hunt the wind and we're going to do all this. And he's like, well, I don't really want to do that. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, well, I want to go right at them. And I'm like, well, Scott, it doesn't work like that. Like, we aren't just going to be able to go right at them. Like, and in my head, I'm thinking, first off, like, you're not the only group of clients we're going to have. Like, I'm thinking about the week after and the week after and the week after that, right? I can't blow these elk off the mountain. You know what I mean? Because they'll run to the next one. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I kind of joked with him. I said, well, Scott, you're kind of breaking rule number one, right off the bat here. But he was adamant. And so to try to kind of agree to disagree, I ended up putting him in a spot. The first night he was there, that was a horrible spot for the wind, especially in the evening. The thermals would be rushing up all day long. The elk would be up on that hillside, that ridge, just sitting there waiting. And they could smell everything. You know what I mean? And as soon as right before the thermals would switch, they would start to walk down that hill, and then they would end up on the water, right as the thermals would switch, and then they could smell everything as they were going down, and then they got there and they would be on the water. And if we've ever put anybody in there, we could never get away with it. So I put him in there. Well, I had a spot that I could watch from up on the hill, just a ways away. So he, sure enough, walked down to this ground blind, set up his Ozonics, did the whole thing. And right at dark, here walked in 2 bulls and a bunch of cows. And I just was flabbergasted. I'm like, that's just cannot be. Like, there's just no way. And I knew the wind was wrong. I mean, I knew it. And it was crazy because I'm like, all right. So I saw it work, and I'm like, okay. So then over the course of the next, 5-6 days that he was there, he really flipped my world upside down. I mean, we were going at elk and getting in on bulls in ways that just completely just not even thinking about the wind and just getting in on them in ways that we just shouldn't have been there. I'm like, that shouldn't have worked, And that was really where it started for me. I actually told him, I said, listen, I'm going to wrestle you for these things when you leave. They were HR 200. This was back in like 2012, 2013. I mean, it was a long time ago. That was my thing as a hunting guide. I actually got to use them after that for years, and I made every guy take them. We would strap them on our backpacks, all sorts of things. And for me, my job as a guide was to try to get clients opportunity. It wasn't about success. My job was to help you get an opportunity. Now, what you did with that opportunity, that's up to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for me, and Ozonics helped get more opportunities. And that's really why I started using it. And I saw it work. And at the time, I mean, I really didn't even hardly know what I was doing with it. I just knew that if I exhausted the ozone on the downwind side, mule deer, elk, black bears, we were just getting away with more. I could put guys in a tree stand on iffy winds where I couldn't before with an HR 200 at the time above their head. And we were getting shots on animals that we weren't before, so it was, and again, that's just really where it started for me. And then it really took off from there. But again, I was the ultimate skeptic, right? I mean, I flat out looked right at Scott and I said, listen, man, it's not going to work on an elk, right? They got bigger eyes, bigger ears, bigger nose. Like, it's just not going to work. And if you ever get to meet Scott, he's the type of guy, he kind of just nods his head and kind of smiled at me. And then, the rest is history. That's the fact is I know it sounds like tomfoolery, but it really, really works. And I think everybody has the same experience. They're going to get an animal on the downwind side and they're going to have that ozone exhausting on the downwind side. They're going to see it work and they're just going to be dumbfounded because we get calls like that all year round. We go to consumer shows in the winter and guys just walk up just flabbergasted. So it really, really works.
This is very interesting. And like you and I talked about before we started recording, I have an HR 200 myself that is not quite as old as the ones that you're describing from your elk hunting story, but it's within a couple of years of that. I think I got mine in 2014 or 2015, I think. But in any case,
right.
I had a similar story hunting black bear. Baited hunt, so I was in a ground blind. The wind is blowing, let me think here, say diagonally across me, so from behind my right to my left shoulder, like that. And I had a bear come out immediately downwind, like literally right into my scent cone or whatever we want to call it. My wind was blowing exactly to her, and I think it was a sow. But in any case, that bear came out and sat down and watched the bait site for 20, 30 minutes, something like that, before coming in to eat. And it was, I imagine looking back on it, that bear realized that there was a ground blind there, knew which way the wind was blowing, knew that when there's a hunter there, that's where the hunter is. It's in that blind. I'm going to come sit here. I can smell, make sure nothing's in this ground blind, listen, and then I'll come out when the coast is clear. And that also just flabbergasted me because that bear was, I didn't have a clear shot on it while it was sitting there. But it was 10, 15 yards away, something like that, just sitting there chilling. And that experience turned me into a believer. And it seems like there's a lot of doubting Thomas type stories like that there are of people having an experience similar to mine, similar to yours, where like, there's no way this should be working, but it should work. What would you say otherwise, in addition to that, to someone that is telling you, hey, listen, this sounds way too good to be true. This sounds like a scam. It sounds like a hoax. You're telling me I have this device. All I got to do is turn it on, set it up in accordance with the instructions, and an animal could be standing directly downwind of me and not realize I'm there. I've heard of scent control before, scent elimination sprays, deodorizing your clothes, even scent-free chewing gum, that sort of thing. And none of those things seem to work as well as what you were describing. So what would you say to someone that was skeptical like that?
I understand where he's coming from. And I think you just hit the nail on the head. The reality is that our experience has taught us that when we get deer on the downwind side, we get winded. Again, I'll just kind of play this conversation because we get this all the time. You're like guys walk up, and honestly, it's kind of funny now because this conversation, like, I don't really know that it works. We don't have that near as much. I think it's kind of crazy because I think in the last few years, that perception has changed. What we hear so much now is guys walk up and they say, all right, man, I have a buddy that swears by this thing. That's what we hear all the time. I got a buddy that swears by it. I got a buddy that swears by it. It used to be back in like 2016 when I first got Ozonics, we would have guys call and be like, all right, man, like, there's just no way this can actually work. They kind of, they go through what you're describing. But to get back to that thing that I always say is like, listen, dude, I totally get it. I was 100% that guy, right? I used to, and I'll tell you the story, and this is kind of how the conversation would go. I was the guy that did all those things. I mean, it was crazy. I used to have a separate washer and dryer, like for my clothes that for only my hunting stuff. I had special, let's just count them out, right? So let's say special washer dryer one, special shampoos, conditioners, soaps, special towels. I had special clothes, again, that I only wore at my house that were in special containers. I had special sprays that I would spray them down with. I had special seat covers. I remember I used to buy the special chewing gum that was supposed to smell like apples, and I had, God knows you couldn't stop at a gas station, right? Those were off limits. And then I would get to where I was going to go hunting, and I had special clothes again that I would put on. And then I would spray down again, and then I would finally walk into the woods. I would spray down when I got to the stand. You get up into the stand and you're finally done jump through all these hoops. And, it sounds terrible to say, but I'm sitting up there and I had Little Caesar's pizza the night before, and I let out a fart of all farts. Right. And in that moment, I'm right back at square one, right? Because it doesn't matter if I give an inch or a mile, I'm still giving. Like close only counts in horseshoe and hand grenades, you follow? And the funny thing is when I was going through all of this, doing all this stuff, right? All this stuff, right? She's my wife, but at the time she was my girlfriend. And this is pre-cell cams. Some guys don't remember the days when you actually had to go in and check your cameras. You know what I mean? And
I remember those days. Yep.
Yeah. You would walk from one to the next on your way in, you know what I mean, to your stand, so you could check them either on the way in or out or da 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 da. So I did that. I remember it. It was like a Thursday or Friday, and I was going to be hunting. I had some time to hunt that weekend. I go in and I'm checking my cameras on the way in. I get up in my stand. I used to carry this little viewfinder thing you could plug your cards into, and you could click through them. You know what I mean? And so I'm looking through the pictures, and sure enough, the buck that I'm after, I have him on camera in the morning. This is an afternoon, and I'm like, oh man, here we go. So I hunt the rest of the day. I sneak out of there. I'm looking at the weather, and the wind is completely wrong for the next day. Completely wrong. And I'm like, ugh. And I'm talking to my now wife, my girlfriend, and I'm like, gosh, I'm so frustrated. She's like, why? And I'm like, the wind's just wrong. And like, I've got that buck on camera. Like he's been there the last couple of days in the morning. Like he's going to be there, and the wind's wrong. And she's like, well, we'll go hunt it. I'm like, babe, I can't. And she's like, well, why not? I'm like, well, the wind's wrong. And she's like, yeah, but like, didn't we just go buy the latest and greatest, suit or spray or whatever it was at the time? And I'm like, well, yeah. And she's like, well, then go hunt the stand. I'm like, babe, I can't. And she's like, and she stopped me and she said, Cole, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And in that moment, I realized, and this is what I talk to people about all the time. I ask, when a guy says like, well, listen, like, I don't know if this really works, and I've used other things that haven't worked. I get you, man. I'm right there with you. Pre-Ozonics, it didn't work for me either. Like the thing that I always ask people is, what happens when you get deer on the downwind side? What happens? And every guy tells me the same thing. They all huff at me and they go, well, I get winded. Exactly. But what you really just said is that your experience has taught you that when you get deer on the downwind side, they wind you. Your experience has taught you that what you're doing right now isn't working. You follow? Mm-hmm. What's the definition of insanity? Why are you even doing it? Most people don't even know, right? Like, why do you buy it? Like, why do you buy sprays? Like, why do you buy all that stuff? If it's not working, if you can't hunt deer on the downwind side, then, and if you're getting winded every time, like, why are you doing it? And most people don't even know what to say. And so my whole thing is it 100%? No, it's not. But right now, you get winded 100% of the time. I understand from people's perspective that they look at scent control like building blocks, right? That they try to stack these blocks up to jump over this hurdle of success, right? I understand that, right? Well, it can't hurt. Yeah, I hear you. But like, is it really working? And the fact of the matter is that for me, once I realized that my experience was teaching me that it wasn't working, I stopped doing all of it. I literally just stopped all of it. I just put on my regular Old Spice deodorant and didn't wash my clothes because it didn't matter. If I got deer on the downwind side, they wouldn't be anyway. So if I gave an inch or a mile, what difference did it make? So I just did none of it. But when I met Scott and I saw it work and I took it back to Iowa and saw it work for myself, now that's the only scent control that I really count on, right? You follow me? And does it work 100% of the time? No. But do I get away with it 8 out of 10 times? Yes. And I know it sounds crazy. I mean, because guys are like, there's no way. And I'm like, dude, listen, buy it, borrow it from a friend, whatever you got to do. You're going to experience whatever experiences. You're going to get a deer on the downwind side. You're going to get away with it. And you're going to go, okay, the light bulb will go on. And then the wheels are going to start to turn. You're going to say, okay, what else can I get away with? I understand it sounds like tomfoolery. But like you said, geez, I mean, I don't even know how many thousands and thousands and thousands of units are out there, and they work. You know what I mean? I mean, there's no tomfoolery about it. Is it going to work all the time? No. But if I always say, like, if I could think about the buck that got away, right? That was standing right there. And imagine if you had 10 extra seconds, 10 extra steps, 10 extra feet, 10 extra yards, what could you have killed? And that, if that alone is all that an Ozonics could help me with, done. But the reality is it does so much more.
Okay,
that was really what it boils down to for me.
That was really good, and your story follows a similar arc to what mine did, because I didn't go to quite the extremes that you did with scent control, but I did a lot of those things, and it seems like bow hunters in particular are especially fanatical about that, because oftentimes they just have to be so much closer to the animal than a rifle hunter, and there's just less margin for error with that stuff. Let's talk a little bit about your specific units. Like you talked about, we have the HR 200. That's what I have. You guys don't manufacture those anymore. So it seems like your entry level unit now is the 230. Is that correct?
Yep. So our first model right now is the HR 230. So that's producing 30% more ozone than your HR 200. Like I said, comes with a standard 4-hour battery. Has the standard mode, boost mode, has the dry wash mode that can be used with our dry wash bag. Like you said, you get the unit, the battery, charger, mounting systems. It's all right inside the box. So everything you need to get out there. That's going to be our base model. And then, like you said, when you jump up from there, what it really boils down to is it ends up being more battery and more ozone. Okay. So it's almost like if Ozonics was a car, as you go from the HR 230 to the 300 to the 500 to 600, the car goes a lot faster and it's got a bigger gas tank. You know what I mean? So again, the HR 300, that is producing 45% more ozone than your HR 230. Again, you get a standard battery with that. But again, the 45% more ozone is the big thing of the HR 300 compared to the 230. And then the big jump is to the 500, and then an even bigger jump to the 600. With the HR 500, you're producing, again, you're still at the same ozone output as you are as the 300 on standard and boost mode, but it also has a hyper boost mode, which is 25% more ozone above boost mode. And then the HR 500 also comes with a XL battery included. Okay. So instead of 4 hours of runtime, you're getting 8 hours of runtime. All right. Okay. And then from a mounting systems perspective, the HR 230 and HR 300 come with our original mounting system. The 500 comes with our new Smart Arm mounting system. It's got a little bit more versatility and maneuverability. And then again, what we just came out with here in the last few weeks has been the HR 600. So that is really an entirely new animal. The 230, 300, 500, the design, the platform, and the way the ozone was produced, the way the air was brought in was very much the same. And the way the fan was on the bottom, it pushed the air over the coil and then the exhaust the ozone out the front of the unit with the buttons on the front of the unit. The HR 600 is entirely new. New battery, a completely new design of the unit. Instead of the air and the fan pulling in the air from the bottom, it's actually pulling the air in at the top and at the front of the unit. It pulls the air in. It's actually a completely redesigned fan. So we're pulling the air in from the top, exhausting it over a replaceable coil. So instead of the coil being inside the unit where you can't take it out ever, now this has got 2 clips that you can actually replace the coil yourself. So we're pulling the air in from the top, pushing the air over that coil, exhausting out the front. The buttons are actually on the bottom. Also, like your 200 and the 230, we went back to the red LED light, so it has lights on the bottom of the unit. And we heard a lot of that from people with the HR3 and the HR500 was, man, I wish you guys had those lights. I really like those lights. So we put the lights back on there as well. And again, the HR600's it's got a new overmold, like I said, a new battery. It has internal charging as well. So yeah, it's just a completely redesign. And then a big thing as well about that is really from an ozone output and a battery life perspective and the unit being quieter, the HR500 was 30% quieter than the 300, okay? Mm-hmm. But the HR600, we're looking at 20% more ozone, 25% quieter, and 30% more runtime. So where we're at on the 500, where we had like 8 hours on boost mode, now we're looking at, on standard mode, we're looking at 13 hours. On boost mode, we're looking at 10 hours. So it's a huge jump from the 8 to 10, right? And if you really wanted to what we hear a lot from people was, man, I wish I just could only had to carry one battery. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. The HR600 on standard mode, comparatively to an HR230 on boost mode, right? You could run it on standard mode if you really wanted to only bring one battery and get 13 hours of runtime, up to 13 hours, right? So it's a big jump in ozone output. It's a big jump in the unit being quieter. And again, the big thing is battery runtime. So yeah, we're pretty excited about that HR600. We've gotten a great response on it so far. And yeah, it's been a long time in the making. Like I said, again, it's just a completely new animal comparatively to what we've done in the past.
Okay, that's all very interesting, and you threw out a lot of stuff in there. Let's dive into
I know. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That was a good overview.
There's a lot of info.
Let's dive into just a couple of the details. So you talk about the different modes: standard boost, hyper boost, sometimes dry wash. My understanding was that the standard mode is, like, it sounds like a medium output of ozone, but that gives you your longest battery life. And if I remember right from the instructions on my HR200, they said that was fine for a ground blind. They recommended the boost mode for a tree stand, which, if I understood right, was more ozone output, but it drained your battery faster. Is that right?
Yep. So yeah, that's what we're talking about. So standard mode, we always talk about standard mode is for like a closed air environment, like a ground blind, right?
Okay.
You don't need all the extra ozone in standard mode or in a ground blind, because you're really bottlenecking where that odor is going out. You follow me? So you can concentrate where your odor is going out. You don't need as much ozone. Boost mode is meant for open air environments. Again, we've just got a lot more variables in a tree stand, right?
All right.
You don't have walls all around you. You don't have a floor or ceiling above you, below you. And so we want that extra ozone output. So again, boost mode is for open air environments for a tree stand. The idea behind hyper boost is, again, if you're in that situation where you just want a little bit extra, you know what I mean? It's that last, 30 minutes before dark, or all of a sudden you look over and you see that buck and looks like he's going to circle on that downwind side. You can put it in that hyper boost mode and give you that 25% more, boost. Does that make sense?
Okay.
More ozone is going to help eliminate more odor. Does that make sense? And then from there, all the units have the dry wash mode, like we talked about, that works with the dry wash bag to help with your, with your gear. And then the HR500 and the HR600 also have locker mode, which works with our Ozonics locker. And that mode is, you can get to that mode through the Ozonics app. The 500 and 600 are also app compatible. So you can download the Ozonics app and turn on and off your unit, switch the modes, do all that stuff, see your battery runtime remaining, all through the app.
So the 230 and the 300, you only control them with buttons on the unit. The 500 and the 600, they have buttons on the unit you can use without the app if you want, or you can use it with an app for some additional functionality.
Absolutely. Yep. You can get to that locker mode through the app. And with the 600, you can also obviously you can switch the modes, but you can also turn the lights on and off through the app as well. So again, like, it's funny. I'm not a big app guy, right? Like, when I'm hunting, I want to just be hunting, right? But the fact of the matter is like, the one thing the app I think is really handy for is to be able to see my remaining runtime. Whenever you switch the modes, you'll see your remaining runtime change literally down to the minute.
Okay.
So that's pretty cool. That's actually, it's funny because I wasn't like a big sell on the app at first. I was like, really, like an app? But we've actually gotten a great response from it. People love it. You know what I mean? And it is nice to be able to, again, it does help eliminate movement, because now you don't have to reach up, and if you're looking to switch the modes or check your runtime, you don't have to do any of that. If you've got it connected, you can just pull your phone out, open it up, and boom, it's right there. You're not having, it's just a lot. There are some huge advantages to it. I think, like I said, people have really, really liked it.
Okay.
So again,
yeah, for the listener that doesn't know what we're talking about, on the older ones, there was a button you had to push on the unit itself, and it would illuminate a light saying you had 75% battery or 25% battery left. And it's an approximation, right? Because light illuminates it's between 25 and 50% somewhere, but there's a big difference between 49 and 26%, and you're taking a guess at it. And so it seems like we have, with this, more ozone output over the years, longer battery life over the years, some additional functionality, some additional features like the app, like the ability to use it in dry wash. And so I'm assuming the dry wash and the locker thing you're talking about, in general, it's a bag. You put all your clothes in it. You put the Ozonics unit in there with them. You run it, and then it deodorizes your clothes. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the whole idea behind like the dry wash bag and the one locker is, I think for me, and I think for a lot of people, I love all the camos we have out there now, right? Like whether you're a Sitka guy or a Kuiu guy or you're Code of Silence guy, whatever it is, right? There's a bunch of really, really good camo out there. And I think it's high-end camo. I also joke about, I think it can be high maintenance, right?
Yep.
Like it doesn't seem like it likes to be washed. I don't know if you've ever actually tried to read the instructions on a tag on your jacket. Like, I mean, I think you got to have like a rocket science degree to figure out how to like cold, warm, dry it like this. Don't dry this one. I mean, it's just too much. You know what I mean? And so, for me, what the dry wash and the one locker has allowed me to do is, instead of having to, let's say I'm hunting 3 days of a week in October, instead of having to come home and try to wash my clothes every single time, I would dry wash them, right? And the other big thing is, the more you wash your clothes, the faster they wear out. So the reality is you can use the Ozonics in the dry wash mode or the locker mode to help eliminate that odor in your clothing and just make it so they don't wear out as fast. Again, the idea is that dry wash mode actually turns the coil on and off, because again, ozone, it's very volatile, right? It can eat stuff away like elastics and rubbers if it is exhausted indiscriminately on something for too long. But again, through the dry wash mode and the locker mode, it's actually turning that coil on and off. So it's the right amount of ozone for the right amount of time. So there's a ton of testing that went in and was involved in that when we first came out with that, to make sure that it didn't eat away at elastics and rubbers, right? So you won't have any trouble in worrying about any of that. Like I said, it turns that coil off during the cycle, and it pumps fresh air to get that ozone off your gear, and then it turns the coil on again. So it's pulsing that coil on and off through the cycle. But yeah, it's a great option, again, to not have to wash your clothes so much and just use your Ozonics instead.
Now, you talk about the boost mode producing more ozone. Is there a downside to using the boost mode aside from the fact that you're going to drain your battery faster?
Man, I don't think so. Like you said, I mean, that's the tricky thing, right? Is like, it's always kind of a juggling act. With, again, more ozone is going to help eliminate more odor, but it's also going to run down your battery faster. What I generally tell people is, I think, and what we've really heard over the years is, if you're buying an Ozonics, eventually at some point you're going to end up getting a second battery, because again, that with a second battery, the worrying about running out of a battery or running, having it shut off on you, that can kind of go away. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's no different than, like, a buddy of mine just bought an electric bike. He bought the electric bike. He was all excited about it. He didn't really think about, the battery at first, right? And all of a sudden he's like, well, geez, man, this thing it's like draining the battery. You know what I mean? So he ended up going back and getting a different bike that actually had 2 batteries built in, right? Well, now guess what? Battery life's not an issue unless he's trying to, like, ride across the state. That's a nice thing. I think a lot of guys end up just buying a second battery at some point. But again, yeah, like I said, I always say, when you're in a tree stand, run it on boost mode. Like, a lot of guys will try to go, well, I just put it on standard mode. to save battery. I get it. And again, ozone is better than no ozone. But again, I also think that in a tree stand, in an open air environment, if you don't have on boost mode, that odor can still get in front of it, right? From what we've seen, it's just better to have it on boost mode.
What are the principles to using one of these devices most effectively? Either you can talk about a ground blind, you can talk about a tree stand.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's probably the thing that we really try to pound home with people is it's all about setup. Setup. That is the most important thing. The thing I always joke about is go to an archery shop and grab the new Matthews bow off the rack and go try to shoot it upside down.
Yeah,
I suggest with a whisker biscuit. No, no. But it just doesn't work, right? Like you got to set them up the right way. You got to shoot them the right way. You can have a Ferrari, but if you can't shift the gears, you can grind them and find them. But it's all about setup. So there's really two ways to set it up, and they are different. They're setting it up in a blind. They're setting it up in a tree stand. In a ground blind, what we're trying to do is we're trying to treat the air leaving the blind, not the air in the blind. That's the important thing. Okay. What a lot of people do is they set their ozonics up in the blind, like behind them or above their head. That's not the right way to be doing it. Okay. In a ground blind, it's a closed air environment. We have eliminated a lot of variables. We've got walls, we've got a floor and a ceiling. We can also manipulate where the air comes in and out of the blind. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So if you can, a lot of guys, we all kind of do the same thing. We set the wind in our face. Okay. So if we're setting the wind in our face, the downwind side is actually behind us, or kind of usually off to our left or off to our behind us to the right. So you already letting the air in the front of the blind. Try to open a small window or crack a window behind you to let the air out. If you closed up your blind or just had the window open in the front and you puffed your wind indicator, it doesn't really know where to go out. If you open a window behind you and you puff that wind indicator, you're going to see all that wind indicator just go flying out that window. We're bottlenecking and forcing where that odor is going out. So what you want to do is set your ozonics up above that window in the downwind side. So when that ozone is being exhausted out of the unit, it comes directly in contact with your odor. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So not the air in the blind, the air leaving the blind. Okay. In a tree stand, again, the big thing is it really comes down to height, direction, and angle. So we always want the ozonics about 6 to 10 inches above your head from the position that you hunt from. So I stand the majority of the time. So I would have my ozonics set above my head for a standing. Okay. So always have it 6 inches above your head. Number 2, direction. We're always pointing the ozonics in the downwind direction. We're not worried about you. We're worried about the odor coming off of you. Okay. So we always want to make sure that we get that ozonics in a downwind direction. Where that becomes really important. And again, sometimes this is our own doing. Like if you ever flip through a magazine, you see an ozonics in a picture on a magazine. A lot of times they just have their ozonics straight above their head. Well, that's how it looks best, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is in that situation, well, for most people, they set the wind in their face. Well, you wouldn't want to have the ozonics just positioned above your head, pointed out in front of you. You would actually want it mounted on the side of the tree and pointing behind you. You follow me? That's the downwind side. If you don't have it set up in the right direction, again, ozone doesn't discriminate. It's going to oxidize on whatever it comes in contact with. So when that ozone comes out of the unit, if you have it set up in front of you and the wind's blowing behind you, it's going to oxidize on your hat. It's going to oxidize on your clothes, on the bark, on the tree. And all of a sudden your odor is getting in front of it. So always pointing the downward direction. And then number 3, angle. We always want the unit at least about a 30-degree angle. That's for like a 0 to 10, 15 mile an hour wind. If it gets to be windier than that, take the unit more vertically straight down. In essence, we're trying to pour that ozone into your downwind side faster when the wind increases. So height, direction, angle. Honestly, that's the thing I think is the most important thing. We have people guys walk up at the consumer shows and say, and it's every time if they say, I've had a bad experience, seriously, 8 out of 10 times it's, you don't have it set up the right way. I mean, I can just flat out, like, we start talking setup and they have it set behind them in a ground blind, or they're just putting it above their head and that's it. And that's just not the right way to be doing it. You got to make sure we are trying to exhaust the ozone on the downwind side. Wherever your downwind side is, that's where we want that ozone going. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of people get that wrong. We try to do everything we can with these types of things, and, instructional videos and instructions in the boxes and things like that, but still just guys miss that. So it's all about setup.
Okay. So let's see here. So let's see, I'm standing in a tree stand. Wind is blowing from right to left, moderate wind, say 5 miles an hour. So mounted 6 to 12 inches above my head, pointing to my left, over my left shoulder, downward at about a 30-degree angle, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Exactly.
And what if the wind is swirling?
Yeah. So again, we always talk about chasing the wind. Okay. So swirling winds are going to be the hardest thing. You follow me? Because again, the wind could be it's just switching. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so that in those types of situations, you may need to try to reposition your ozonics. The best thing I say about swirling winds as well is you can always, if you have your ozonics set up the right way, like what you just described, the winds at your right to left, you've got it pointed to the left. If you catch a whiff of the ozonics, you catch a whiff of ozone, you know that the wind is swirling. Because if you have it set up the right way, you shouldn't be smelling it. You follow me?
Yes.
Because it's getting exhausted on the downwind side. So if you do catch a whiff, that's a great time to get out your wind indicator, check the wind, and then reposition the ozonics. That's the whole idea behind the mounting system, is you can loosen it, maneuver it, and get it repositioned. Again, swirling winds can be really tough. And that's, again, where I talk about boost and hyperboost mode. More ozone is going to help eliminate more odor. And that's going to help when you have those swirly wind days where your odor may get in front of the ozone, right? Because all of a sudden, if you got a point to the left and it switches back to the front or to the right all of a sudden, and you don't catch it for 5-10 seconds because you just didn't know, and then you catch a whiff of ozone, well, you've got that lag, you know what I mean? So that's where that boost and hyperboost can be really handy.
What if I go out and there's almost no wind? What's the best way to set it up?
Yeah, absolutely. So when there's hardly any wind, and again, it's interesting, actually, back in 2016, the first fall that I started Ozonics, I actually kept track of every hunt that I went that fall, and I kept track of the wind speed and the wind direction and all the deer encounters, and I kept track of all of it. I had it all in this big spreadsheet, and it was a lot of hunts. I didn't really realize. I was like, wow, I've been hunting a lot. You know what I mean? It was like every weekend. I'm like, I had to go home and give my wife a big kiss because I'm like, thank you, But of all those days that I hunted, I only had one morning where it was actually calm. So those calm days don't really usually happen very often. But if they do, what you would want to do is you would want to just position that ozonics right above your head. And that's really the only time that it's okay to exhaust the ozone kind of right down on you. Because if you puff your wind indicator, a lot of times that wind indicator just falls. Your odor is really just falling. That's where I would just position it above my head and kind of point it right down on me. A lot of times you can take it more vertically straight down because your odor is really just going down. It's just really doesn't really know where to go. You know what I mean? So just position it above your head and kind of point it right down on you.
All right. So last question on positioning. I hunt out of a ground blind sometimes. It's a sealed box blind with windows I can move up and down, has a door and all that stuff on it. So you're saying for best use of an Ozonics, I should actually have two windows open on it. So for instance, earlier this year, I was on a hunt. The wind was blowing, I think it was actually blowing from behind me towards the feeder, but I had my Ozonics unit up, mounted in the window directly in front of me on top of it. So blowing down out the window like that. Yep. Should I have opened a window on the back as well for best use?
Yeah. So again, like we talked about earlier, a lot of times, like you're just describing, you're probably setting the wind in your face and the downwind side's behind you.
Yeah.
It's always tricky with that downwind side because you don't want to silhouette yourself, right? Like if you do open a window too much and all of a sudden you move, if you were standing out of the blind, you had two windows open, you move in front of that window, they're going to catch that movement. But to your point, yes, I would say if the windows, like say you have like that hard side blind you're describing, and the windows slide up and down, a lot of times you can just open that sliding window and just position that ozonic so it's exhausting out that window. And if you were to puff your wind indicator, you're going to see that it's obviously coming in on the upwind side and it's going to go out on the downwind side. You follow me?
Yeah.
So yeah, you're much better off to have that window. And again, I try to keep as much of the windows closed as I can. And those sliding windows are pretty handy because, again, you could just only open like the bottom half and position that ozonics there rather than set it up above and have the window completely open. Or a lot of times what I'll do, like if it's in a hub style ground blind and they're just windows on like a piece of material that like has a piece of, and it's just like clips at the top, I will just position my ozonics where I'll create space instead of moving it like left to right where I'm creating a big opening. I'll just move it like away from the wall of the blind. Does that make sense? So I create a space, but I'm not silhouetting myself. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And then I would position the ozonics in that space that I've created.
Now, we've talked a lot about using it in stationary positions, tree stands, ground blinds, but you mentioned earlier on your initial hunt with the guy in Colorado that it sounded like you were using it in mobile stands sometimes. Is that something that you can do?
Absolutely. You know, what's funny is I was in Wisconsin this last winter, spring at like a sports show there. Wisconsin Open Season Sportsman's Expo. It's like a big long name.
All right.
But anyway, they had us doing seminars there, and I had these two guys that walked in at the seminar, and they came right up to me before it started, and he said, he was like, I've been using ozonics for like 15 years. I'm like, oh, great. And he goes, I want to see if you can teach me something new today. And I was like, okay. And I said, well, I about guarantee you, I can tell you, I'll point at you during this presentation when I think I'm going to teach something new. And he's like, okay. So we got to the part about talking about not only just using it in the tree stand ground blind, but using it on the way in and out, using it in a mobile situation, right? Like ozonics, we have a kinetic pack where the ozonics actually fits in the top of the pack. When I was in Colorado, he didn't even have that yet. I just took baling wire and I would connect them to our backpacks that way. But I always tell a story, and that's when I started to point at that guy during that lecture. I was at a Midwest Whitetail event. That's a partner of ours. They do a lot of stuff on YouTube and they produce lots of videos. They do a great job. And I was at a Midwest Whitetail event they have in the summertime. They bring all their people together, and I was there getting a chance to talk to people. And I was realizing that a lot of guys weren't using it on the way in and out. So there's like 100 some guys there, like listening to me talk. And I said, all right, guys, I want everybody to raise their hand if you use ozonics in a tree stand. Well, they all proudly raised their hand. Great. Keep your hands up. I said, now, keep your hands up if you use your ozonics on the way in and out. And they all put their hands on except like 3 guys. And it was actually a young kid. He was like 13, 14 years old. And he was so excited. And I asked him, I said, well, when do you guys use the way in? He goes, oh yeah. He goes, my dad and he said, we had a buck last year. And he goes, it was out in this switchgrass field and the wind was wrong to get in there. And he goes, we literally just carried our ozonics above our heads. We held them above our heads and walked in and then kept them running, climbed up in the stand and got them back up put them on the mounting system. He goes, and that buck, like an hour before dark, stood up and walked right in. It was out there the whole time. They had no idea we were there.
Wow.
And that's the thing, like, and it's funny because that guy at that seminar, he looked at me and he started nodding his head. And he goes, I stopped and I go, did you know that? And he goes, you know, it's funny. He goes, I've been using it all these years and I've never used it on the way in and out. And it's funny because when you start seeing it work, you understand like, okay, I need to, it's almost like you feel naked if you don't have it running up there, right? You get it up and you turn it on, you're like, whew, oh, good. But we emit odor all the way in and all the way out. You know what I mean? And it's funny because like, and so it's, you know, I always say your odor is like a river and the ozonics is the dam. If you lift the dam and you let the water through, you can't put it back. You follow? Mm-hmm. And the reality is the way that we get in and out of our spots a lot of times can be as important, if not more important, of where we may be hunting that day. And the other reality is that we all don't hunt 1,000 acres, right? I don't have any of my own land. I have a couple permission pieces that are 40 acres. You know what I mean? And so the reality is I got to get down there to that river, but I've got to get there. You know what I mean? And so sometimes the best thing to do would be not to go that day because I can't, the wind's wrong. Like, I'm going, you know what I mean? Like, it's not about hunting the right day. It's about hunting right now. That's where, again, before I worked at Ozonics, when I was just guiding, we used to just connect them to our packs. When I first got back from Colorado and used them, even then, I just used to carry it. I would just run it and I would just carry it in my hand. But again, we have the kinetic pad that you can fit it on, or just figure out a way to run it all the time. Again, it can help eliminate your odor. Does that make sense? Even, like I said, this time of year, checking trail cameras, like even with cell cams, the reality is I've only got one on a solar panel. I've still got to go in and change batteries. You know what I mean? And so we are putting pressure on the pieces of ground that we hunt. And so the fact of the matter is just like we talked about earlier, if you go out there and you check your trail cams, the deer, once you leave, they can't see you. Once you leave, they can't hear you. But guess what they can still do when you leave? They can still smell you. It's not ironic that you go change batteries on a cell cam and you all of a sudden got all these deer standing right in front of you sniffing all around. They know you were there. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so use ozone to help eliminate that odor all the time, not just in the tree stand, not just in the ground blind.
So when you're using it in a kinetic pack, or someone just straps it to the outside of their backpack or is holding it over their head when they're walking around, do you advise using it on the boost or the hyper boost mode when they're doing that?
Yep, absolutely. At least boost mode. Yep, I would run it on boost mode. Yep, okay. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So it's something I've always wondered about, because I had the same realization that you were talking about. It was like, I sneak in there and then I get set up and put my Ozonics unit up after I get to my stand and all that. I was like, man, I hope nothing smelled me on the way in. And so once again, it's no guarantee, but you're moving the odds a little bit in your favor by doing that, moving in. I am assuming that someone could use this in a similar manner on a spot and stalk hunt for elk, for instance, bow hunting for elk when you're trying to call them in or something too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, I mean, that's really where I cut my teeth using Ozonics was out west, and like you said, again, the reality is, and you said it, you hit the nail on the head earlier, bow hunting especially is a sport of close. We've got to get close to them. And when you start getting close to animals, it's just so tricky. It's, the wind switches, the wind swirls, it just gets hard. And the reality is, like I said, if it's on a spot and stock hunt, a lot of times what we start to do in the fall is we start to call, whether even on a whitetail hunt, if you're sitting on the ground, you're rattling, you're grunting, you're elk hunting, you're cow calling, those animals, they come in, they circle on the downwind side. And so that's where having it with you wherever you go can really, really be so beneficial.
Mm-hmm. All right. As we wrap up, I have just a couple final questions, and we'll try and keep these short. First, are there any safety issues with using an Ozonics unit, specifically just with the producing of the ozone?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great question. The great thing for us is, like you said, these are meant to be used, like you say, in an open air environment or even in a ground blind, we're exhausting it outside the blind. You follow me?
Okay.
So when it comes to that right off the bat, like we don't have to have any sort of like OSHA warning labels or anything on the box, or even really deal with that, because again, we're using it in an open air environment, right? We're not trying to again, you don't want to be closing yourself up in a ground blind for an extended period of time. If you do, like you said, it can make you feel dizzy, right? Like it can make, I've experienced it too, where all of a sudden, again, when I first started using it, I didn't know any better. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like felt my lips start to tingle. You know what I mean? If you do have if you have asthma, if you have some sort of heart condition, I would be careful around ozone, right? Like I said, make sure that you're using it the right way. The big thing I always tell people is when it comes to the safety of it, again, I mean, maybe this is a bad analogy, but it's funny because we all go to a gas pump every day and pump gas in our car, right? Mm-hmm. Don't think twice about it. If you're smoking a cigarette while you're pumping gas, boom goes the dynamite. You know what I mean? You can blow up a square block. You know what I mean? So it's funny, it's not that even ozone is dangerous like that, but you know what I'm saying? It just meant you got to use it the right way. And so again, if you're using it the right way in a hunting situation, you're exhausting that ozone the downwind side. You shouldn't be smelling it. But again, if you have asthma, that type of thing, be careful around it. We've got a bunch of stuff. And we've got, all the information like that in our user guides, our quick start guide, to make sure that people are aware of that. Because again, like anything, you got to be careful with it.
So you just take a whiff of it every once in a while, no big deal, but you should not be pumping it straight into your ground blind or using it in a sealed container or something like that. And if that's the case, you either need to turn it off or adjust it so you're not getting that continuous.
I mean, like even for example, like we have a little ozone you can plug into a car. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because there's different companies that have those same types of things. We've been trying to, and we just came out with that just here a couple years back. But the idea is it's meant to be used when you're not in your vehicle. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it's funny because like a lot of these other companies have been producing them, and they never. I've looked. I never really saw where they said, "Yeah, just plug it right in when you're driving." They said like just plug it in when you're driving down the road. They didn't really say like don't be in the vehicle. You don't want to hotbox yourself with ozone for an extended period of time. You know what I mean? It's funny. It's still a gas. You got to be aware of it. Again, we're exhausting down one side, and you should be fine. Just don't like close all the windows up and breathe it in for 5 hours.
So what about the unit's lifespan? Does an Ozonics unit wear out?
Yeah, that's a great question. Here's what we always say and what we always talk about. We talk about an optimum ozone output. Okay. So that's the amount of ozone that it produces when it leaves, when it's getting manufactured. The reality is that it's going to produce ozone for decades. You follow me? Like it'll produce ozone for longer than we would hunt with it, but it eventually will fall outside that optimum ozone output. Okay. Again, what happens is that we're pushing air through that unit and the coil eventually gets dirty. I always say, think about the coil like a ceiling fan in your house. You can go up on your ceiling fan right now and you can probably play tic-tac-toe. You follow me?
Mm-hmm.
It's not that your house is dirty, but it's just the fact that it's constantly circulating air and dust and debris collects on it. Same with the coil. The big thing I would tell you to do is you can get a can of dry compressed air and you can spray off that coil, spray off that fan once a season. That will help keep it clean. If you never do any of that, we generally tell people you're going to get about 3 to 4 seasons before you kind of fall outside that optimum ozone output. And then you can send it in and do a refurbishment, which again, replaces that coil, replaces the fan, and it's good as new again. The HR600 has a replaceable coil, so you can actually do that replacement yourself, which is kind of cool. Again, the nice thing about that too is when you're sending it into us, if you've got your Ozonics at our office, it's not with you in your tree stand. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, like you said, I really commend Scott, the owner of Ozonics, about like the refurbishment program, because we could say, oh yeah, they produce ozone forever. But the reality is that eventually that ozone output does wane. You know what I mean? Because you're just constantly pushing air through the unit and the coil can get dirty. And so we just try to be really upfront about that. And like I said, the other question that always leads to is like, okay, well then, does that mean it only has a certain lifespan? I mean, the best way I would describe that is if you had it for 4 seasons, you replace the coil and you have it for another 4 seasons, man, 8 to 10 years from now, you're probably going to want the next Ozonics unit like you, right? You've got an HR200,
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And if it's running great, but you're looking at this going, man, there's these other ones that got more ozone and more battery. Like, that's kind of nice, so that's just the way we are, but you can get a lot more out of it. Just really depends on how you take care of it.
So when I turn my Ozonics machine on, it still has that purple glow inside of it. It still is obviously producing some ozone that I can smell. Is there a way to know
absolutely.
if it's not at that quote unquote optimal level?
Yeah. So the 2 things that I would say is take it into a dark room, take it into your bathroom, turn it on boost mode, and look at that coil. And if you see the coil glowing, purple uniformly across, great. If all of a sudden you see half of it that looks like it's kind of black or it doesn't look like it's glowing, that's a good indicator that it's not producing as much. The other real telltale is, and we get this all the time, guys will call in and say, man, dude, I've had this thing for 3, 4, 5 years or longer, and I've had great luck with it, but man, I'm getting winded. Like I'm getting winded a lot. Like I haven't gotten winded like that in years, and all of a sudden I'm getting winded. How long have you had your Ozonics, right? Or how you setting it up? And that's usually a great indicator. If you start getting winded in situations you were getting away with it, that's a good indicator it's time to maybe look at doing a paid refurbishment.
Okay, very good. Well, as we wrap up today, the last thing I want to talk about is you guys have an ongoing sale for all of your Ozonics units. But tell us a little bit about the sale, what it involves, how long it is going to last.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, the HR 600 just came out on July 15th. So yeah, we're super stoked about that. We're actually running a pretty awesome sale right now. It's 20% off that HR 600 when you use the code preseason. So like I said, when you get to checkout, it has a place where you can put in a promo code. And again, that's 20% off. So like I said, the unit is we've got that price at $699. So it's $140 off. That's pretty awesome.
Okay, wonderful. People can reach your website by clicking the link in the show notes or going to thebiggamehuntingblog.com/ozone.
The other big thing I always tell people is if you have any questions on any of the sales or you're looking to purchase or just have questions about the Ozonics, feel free to give us a call. Like I said, we take a lot of pride in our customer service. I think if you talk to people, they'll tell you that we're here and we're glad to talk to you. Our phone number is 979-285-2401. We'd love to hear from you, so don't be afraid to reach out.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us about Ozonics. I thought it was very interesting. I learned a lot, and I hope the audience did as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. Like I said a minute ago, for more information about these Ozonics units or to purchase one for yourself, click the link in the show notes or go to thebiggamehuntingblog.com/ozone. Ozone is spelled OZONE. Use promo code PRESEASON, all one word, PRESEASON, for 20% off any order to include their brand new HR 600 unit, but that code also will apply to some of their older and less expensive units as well. This offer expires 29 July 2024, so you have a limited time to take advantage of that discount. Now, like we discussed, I have used an Ozonics unit for years now, and it has helped me successfully take whitetail deer, black bear, and feral hogs. It's not limited to just those animals either. For instance, Tyler Friel uses an Ozonics unit routinely when hunting both black and grizzly bear over bait up in Alaska, and he credits this machine to helping him take a couple of bears, including a couple of real nice ones that he thinks would have smelled him and spooked otherwise if he weren't using an Ozonics. And I think he even used one on his famous hunt where he took a grizzly bear with a 6.5 Creedmoor that we discussed back in episode 282. Another friend of mine has even used an Ozonics unit for bow hunting moose in Canada in a similar manner to what Cole described in this episode, with some hunters using a jury-rigged setup to have that Ozonics unit attached to the outside of a backpack. In each case, most of the value in these Ozonics devices comes from a combination of potentially getting you additional hunting opportunities and increasing your odds of success in those situations. We all have limited amounts of time we can hunt due to work and family obligations and all of those other things we have to do. Well, buying one of these Ozonics devices and using it properly can help you make the most of those limited opportunities and hunt in an area known for game activity without having to wait for perfect wind conditions. Remember what Cole was saying about how he was getting daylight photos of that real nice buck, but the weather forecast was forecasting wind blowing from the wrong direction? Well, with an Ozonics unit, you're more likely to be able to get in there and kill a deer in a situation like that without spooking them. It's not guaranteed, but it's more likely to work out in your favor using one. The rest is up to you. An Ozonics unit obviously won't help much if you're hunting in an area without a lot of game, if you're not doing the other things right, like sitting still, or if you're just not using it correctly. But an Ozonics unit can help increase your odds of success afield and may very well be the difference between coming home empty-handed versus punching your tag. Get one for yourself via the link in the show notes or go to thebiggamehuntingblog.com/ozone. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you sign up for my email list. To do that, click the other link in the show notes or go to huntingguns101.com. Sign up there for my free ebook on the best hunting calibers. You'll get my free ebook when you do that, plus you'll also start to receive the emails I send out every weekday. If you like the podcast, you'll love those emails. So make sure you're getting them too by going to huntingguns101.com and signing up there. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thanks for listening. I'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to thebiggamehuntingblog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.
Brace yourself for something fuel nominal. Unleaded 88 is the clear fuel choice. It's cheaper, cleaner, and greener. And it's grown by Iowa corn farmers. Now that's totally worth the hype. So pump it up with Unleaded 88.